Good morning, all. If you are on the East Coast of the US, other places, or good late morning, it might be good morning, good evening. I'm Lindsay Pfister-Kerr of LPK Coaching. Thank you to all of you who are joining me today. Some of you are joining on LinkedIn, some of you are joining me on Zoom, so I appreciate you all being here. I am very excited to talk about today's topic, which is finding some self-kindness to support yourselves. This is a big topic for both myself, which it took a lot of learning and growing for me to do. And it's also a big topic for a lot of my clients that I work with. And it's amazing where some self-kindness or self-compassion, whatever wording you want to use, works its way into things. And how I've had some clients who have had some surprises with that. They've had some revelations that have surprised me. So it's definitely something that is very supportive, but it's also exceptionally hard to work into how we treat ourselves, how we approach things that don't go as planned, or failures, or mistakes, or whatever words we want to use. So I'm really excited to talk about this and to give you'll learn with me a lot of the information I like to share, whether it's through these webinars or whether it's through emails I send out or blog posts that I do. I like quick tips to make things yours, to make them that how can you be able to bring these as part of your life and make them that you are quick and capable of bringing these into your everyday. So I like quick, short. That's why I do 30-minute webinars, because I know all of you are busy and don't have a lot of time. So we're going to dive right in today. And the main areas we're going to focus on is one of my big learnings in this area was looking at the difference between discernment and judgment. So we're going to spend some time looking at that, because a lot of times when we talk about self-kindness or self-compassion, for me at least, and for a lot of people I talk to, one of the big thoughts that comes up is, oh, I'm just making excuses. If I'm not hard on myself, then I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to improve. I'm not going to be better. And we're going to look at how do we keep growing and improving and being better without being harsh or hard on ourselves. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at what this inner critic does and I've done a lot of talking about inner critics, and they're those lovely voices that love to have a lot of chatting going on in our heads. So there we have that in there. And then in addition to that, we're going to look at some ways to start to bring some, like I said, and I'll use a variety of words because not everybody has to find the word that works for them, but some kindness, some compassion, the same thing that we give towards our colleagues or our friends or our loved ones, give that to ourselves. So we're going to spend some time working through. I'm going to try to give you some tips, some ways that you can take this right from this webinar and go include it into your day, and then give you some foundation to start to build on and grow from there. So I really appreciate your time. I don't doubt some of you may be multitasking, and I totally get that. But if you want to take some notes, especially when I'll call out the point when you might want to take some notes, just because I like frameworks. So when I'm really stressed or upset, if I can go back to just a small little checklist in my head, that's helpful for me. So what might be helpful is when we get to that part, I'll let you know you might want to jot down just a couple of notes to reference, maybe throw it on a post-it note. So I'm going to start with a question. And if anybody on Zoom wants to chime in the chat, or if you're on LinkedIn and you want to, I apologize, I can't always look over on LinkedIn to see what people are posting, but I do get to see it and respond afterwards. But if you want to share your answer to this question, please feel free. So the question I have to get started with is, who is your biggest critic? And one of the things I've seen a lot with my clients, which is the most common thing, is that their biggest critic is not always who we would think. So is it your boss? Is it your spouse? Is it a friend? Is it a parent? Is it a colleague? And some of you might say, well, yeah, they can be a little hard on me, but I'm going to guess, as I'm seeing here in the Zoom, and also as I've learned from my coaching clients and for myself, it's ourselves. I I am always in awe that no one can ever be as hard on us as we can be on ourselves. And we're the person we spend the most time with. We're the person we're supposed to care about the most. We're the person that is who we're always with, and we are so harsh. Imagine if you did have a friend or a colleague or someone who was as harsh or as mean to you as you are to yourself. You'd avoid them. You'd complain about them constantly. You wouldn't want to be in the same room with them. And I'm guessing if it's at work, you may even start looking for a new job, as many of us have when that happens. But when it comes to us being difficult or harsh to ourselves, it's okay. I need that. I need to be harsh on myself. I need to be difficult because if I'm not, I'm never going to get better. I'm never going to grow. Which I'm going to try to challenge your thinking on that. So how often does this inner critic or this your internal critic show up? And does it sometimes feel like this when they show up? They come out of nowhere, they just scream at us, we feel awful, and then they go away eventually. Sometimes it takes a while. And for some of us, it can start slowly. And it can be that little, oh, can't believe that happened. Oh, is that really what you said? Oh, I don't know if I would have said that. Oh, well, do they like us? Do they like me now? What if I upset them? What if they never want to work with me? What if they want to leave? And then it can build to seeing this guy of you're horrible, you're awful, you're an imposter, you're not good at your job. And that's what it can build to. So self-criticism is where and I've learned from also, I work with clients around the world. I work with them across the country. And what a lot of them have shared, it can be cultural. Some cultures can have put this through, and it can be societal, that this is a mindset we've developed. It can also be from personal situations. It can be from if we, had a teacher who was hard on us, or a coach, or a parent. And also, we often think about this coming from a negative place, but it can also come from us getting some positive feedback. If in school we always got A's and we really liked how that felt because the teacher was proud of us, our parents were proud of us, people admired our work. Well, now we want to keep that. We want to keep being good at what we do. We want to keep building on that. So, what do? We develop an inner critic. So before we get to that inner critic person, but that's where this comes from. So the thing we have to remember though is research has shown that self-criticism actually is more of a hindrance than the help we've convinced ourselves. And I use help in air quotes a lot because help isn't always help of the true definition of being supportive. Research has shown that when this happens and this sets in, our stress levels go up, our confidence levels go down, we have less motivation to do things. We start to experience anxiety, guilt, fear. And when all of those things start setting in, one of the things that can happen is we go into a fight, flight, or freeze mode, which can really hurt our ability to make decisions, our productivity, our creativity, our ability to do our work. So if the self-criticism sets in, those feelings start coming up, we're either going to fight and be angry and figure out how we're going to do this, and not fight in terms of like, I'm going to go in and take this on. It can bring up we can bring up negative feelings. We can go to flight, which is, I'm getting out of here. I can't do this. I can't handle this. I'm going to avoid this. I'm going to procrastinate. I don't want to deal with this. Or we freeze, which that can tend to be mine. I go into some analysis paralysis. And if anybody can agree with, recognize some of these, or you're starting to recognize how this affects you, please, I encourage you to share. So when we go into this, I go into a lot of analysis paralysis, and I've gotten better at moving beyond that, but I have a lot of clients that go there too. And there's never enough data, there's never enough facts, there's never enough information. We need more to give us that feeling that to quiet that criticism. or to meet that criticism, because I am going to turn in something perfect, or I'm going to put something out that's perfect. And so when we do that, it causes a lot. It's actually the opposite of what we're hoping to happen. So take a moment and just stop and think for just a second. And it could be something that's happened today, in the past week, or maybe it's daily. How often does this self-criticism come up for you? How often are you questioning you, your abilities, your work? I think one of my favorite learnings is from Dr. Kristen Neff, who does a lot of research on self-compassion. And she has a great website that provides a lot of more depth information on this. And one of the things that she shared of trying to bring self-compassion into our lives is to recognize that perfection is not a reality. There's never anything that will be perfect. And when we recognize that, and that's hard for those of us who are perfectionists. That's hard for us to accept, because I love when people are like, oh, accept and start to get comfortable with imperfection. And my physical body reaction is like, oh, how can I do that? Because that's a challenge. But I've had to step not into, good enough works or accept imperfection. And some people that resonates with, and if that resonates with you, that is awesome, and run with it. But for me, it's a little uncomfortable. But I've had to step back, and I kind of use the approach I use when I file my taxes, or when I worked in school districts and used to have to file federal forms. There was a statement at the end of all those federal forms I had to sign my name to, that I believe that what I was submitting in that moment was true and accurate under penalty of law, which that's a little intimidating here, penalty of law. And when I used to step back in that moment, I would have to sit there, because if not, I would never have sent those forms in, and my school would have lost out on money. But when I sat there and I thought about it, I thought, in this moment, what I'm putting forth, I think, is what is true, what is accurate, and is to the best of my knowledge and ability. And I could send that off. And that's how I've tried to work this in, is to stop and think that in this moment is what I'm doing. Now, could I learn something 10 minutes after I hand that off to the mailman? Absolutely. Or after I hit submit on the computer, I might learn something. But that's kind of what life is like. In this moment, can you feel good about what you're doing if we can quiet those critics? So that's what our next step and our next goal is. So we've recognized that self-criticism is not giving us what we think it should. So as we move into it, the next thing to stop and think about is, how do we still keep growing and learning? Because we don't want to go, oh, well, it just is, and things didn't go great, so whatever. And we can do that sometimes. If it's something little, if it's not that big of a deal, it's something that we realize was really out of our control, that is a great way. We can just let it go and just say, okay, couldn't have done it differently. Nothing I could have done would have made a difference. That is one option. And that is one, and we want to truly let it go, not say, oh yeah, we're letting it go. And then we think and think and think about it. We're really letting it go. However, on the other side of it is, there are times we still want to learn and grow. And what we can do is look at it and take a step back and look at the difference between discernment and self-judgment. Discernment is, that meeting didn't go as I planned that it would. What happened? What actually happened? Not that I'm reading what everybody's thinking that I can never know. What actually happened? What went well? Well, they listened, they asked questions, they want more information. That went well. What didn't go well? Well, the argument that I made, there was a couple of points I missed that a colleague called out. There were some typos in the slides. We didn't have the discussion. That didn't go the way I wanted it to. So then we can take that and go, well, what can I do different next time? How can I improve this? How can I get some additional information? How can I approach this from a different perspective? What support could I use to help me look at this differently? That's discernment. That's growing. That's recognizing things, what did go well, because we do want to do that. Even if it's something small, like, hey, somebody commented they love the color of my slides. Find the smallest thing, but find something. And then look at the reality of what's happening. And what really, and I had a client share that with me one time, which I thought was a great question. And I use it a lot. She said to me, a question I often use is, what's the reality? Not the story I'm telling myself, what's the reality? So that's discernment. Discernment, though, can ease, and some of us skip discernment and go straight to self-judgment. Some of us kind of see we start with discernment, then we go down a slippery slope of self-judgment. So what can we do with that? Well, self-judgment is starting with a lot of why questions. Why did you do that? Why did you think you were capable? Why do you think you can even do this job? Why didn't they like me? Why didn't they like what I did? Why did I put that? Why did I put myself out there? Why can't I do this? Why can't I be good at presenting? Why am I not as good as my colleague? Or why am I not as good as that parent over there? Or whatever it is. Those are self-judgment. And we really can't answer those questions. One, we can't be completely unbiased. And two, some of those don't have the answers. I worked with a client one time who had a really hard time. They were in the entertainment industry, had a really hard time of saying no to other colleagues who wanted them to take their shift. And the person had their inner critic was a people pleaser. And the client was worried all the time that if they said no, these people wouldn't like them. So they would always say yes, but then be really angry about it. And when we first started talking about it, it was why? Why can't I say no? Why do I say yes? Why am I always stuck doing this? Why do I just let everybody walk all over me? But when we took an opportunity and shifted this, and we looked at it from a perspective, and the person just felt bad in the end, but with no answers. When we played around with looking at how we could discern what happened versus judging, we started asking some questions like, what could I say differently next time? How can I make clear to this person that I just can't do it this time, or I don't have the time available? Or what are some go-to statements I could have? What are some ways I can feel okay about this? And we could really start to dig down and actually get some actionable ways to approach it and discern how to fix the situation versus judging the situation. And it made a pretty big difference. So once we're able to start to see where we're judging ourselves. Oh, I'm so bad at presentations. Oh, I'm horrible at this. Or maybe it's in your personal life. Oh, I'm not a good enough parent. That person's a much better parent. Why can't I be a parent like that? Or why can't I'm just not good enough to do this. They're going to figure out that I'm really not meant to have this job. And all of those kinds of things. And we're going with a lot of assumptions there too. So to shift, we're going to step now into looking at how can we shift into and stay in discernment. And a big part of judgment comes from our inner critic. And our inner critic wants us to judge ourselves. They think they're going to help us by doing that. And this is the part where I said, if you have a moment to grab a little Post-it note or a piece of paper to get some notes, just to give yourself 3 quick tips to refer back to, this would be the time. So one thing to start with is you're going to want to acknowledge your inner critic. And you may or may not recognize that this person is really powerful right now in your head. So I want you to stop for a moment and just think about, maybe it was today, maybe it was previously, the last time that you were really hard on yourself. Take a moment and think of some of the things that came up for you. Whether it was feelings, maybe they were embarrassment, maybe they were frustration, maybe they were sadness. And also think about some of the things you said to yourself, which this may, and if this isn't a comfortable place to go to, that's okay. You don't have to. But if you start to hear some of the most common phrases you might be saying to yourself, that's an inner critic. And some people call them gremlins, some people call them saboteurs, whatever word you want to use. But one of the things you want to do is acknowledge them. Because when you acknowledge something and shed light on it, it loses some of its power. Think about it this way. In the middle of the night, you come downstairs to get something and you don't turn on any lights, but you see from the street light a reflection on some mass or form in the middle of your floor. Some of our minds might go to, oh my gosh, what's in my house? Is there like a critter? Did something get in? Oh my gosh, what is that? Did the dog make a mess? Whatever it is. And because we're not shedding light on it, our mind starts telling us story after story after story about what this horrible thing could be. And you flick on a small light or just any light, and you recognize that it's your shoe that fell off the bench, or it's a toy your child left in the middle of the floor. And all of that, all of those stories go away. And that's kind of what it's like when you acknowledge your inner critic. If you can look at that and call it out, and you may not be, some people might be really familiar. I was really familiar with my perfectionist. I haven't got a whole image for her. She is a very stern looking, perfectly pressed, coiffed looking woman with a clipboard. I'm a very visual person. But if you can recognize where those negative statements are coming from, that it's not you saying it to you, it's a part of you that is judging you, and you shine some light on it, it's not as strong. So you want to shine some light on that and call it out. And you can mentally call it out or be like, okay. And maybe you don't have a name for it. Maybe you don't know what it is. You can just call it critic. Be like, I hear you. And then if we just keep sitting and letting that person talk, that critic is going to get stronger and stronger and tell a bigger story. And it's amazing where our minds can go with these stories. So to help slow that down, we want to then take a moment to connect with our senses and practice some mindfulness. This is a big one I use with a lot because I've got a speedy brain. A lot of clients I work with, their minds are always going. And when we just give them free rein, it is amazing what they can come up with. But as researchers, our brain is not built for multitasking. So if we direct our brain somewhere else, it slows down their speed. So we're able to take a moment if we take some deep breaths and feel ourselves breathing. Maybe that doesn't work for you because sometimes when we have to go into the body, that can be because we're feeling anxious, we're feeling embarrassed, or what we're feeling. So sitting in that emotion can be a little hard. So we can go outside and still connect. We can connect with a sound. We can connect with a sensation of our legs, or if our hands are cold or warm, or we can go with a smell, or we can go take a sip of coffee and taste it. So sometimes breathing can be helpful because we're connecting with how we're feeling. But sometimes if we're feeling a really strong negative emotion, that can be challenging, which was a recent learning of mine that was really fascinating. So maybe we want to go outside to a sound. Maybe it's the humming of the lights. Maybe it's a car going by. But find a way to connect with something, whether it's your senses or your body, and that will slow down because the brain's going to go from putting all the spotlight on this person who's a judge, this internal part that's judging you, to a different part. And the mind can't stay in both places. So you want to connect with your senses. You can use any of the five senses. You can use breathing, whatever it may be. And then once you've calmed down, slowed down, we want to then go to some of those questions I was using before for discernment. We want to take a look and start to ask some what or how questions instead of asking why. Why is going to put us on the defensive? Why is going to lead us down a rabbit hole that we may not be able to get out of? So if you can, start with your first question is what went well? Find something small. I wore a great outfit. I didn't say a bunch, which is a problem I can run into. What went well? And then start to go into, what do I need to learn? Maybe there's nothing, and maybe you let it go. Or what can I do differently? How can I approach this? What supports are available for me? What new information could I use? And keep and monitor the questions. It doesn't need to be a huge list. Try to stick with some basic questions. And maybe you want to come up with those ahead of time for yourself. Maybe if you know that you just start thinking about it and you go into problem solver mode like I do, and you're going to think about so much, and then your brain's going to rev back up. Maybe come up with 3 or 4 questions and that are general enough that you can stick with. So we want to make sure we can do that. And when we're able to recognize and move ourselves into this space, we're able to then move into a place where we can start looking at some self-compassion, some, like I said, self-kindness, grace, space, whatever you want to call it. Find the word that works for you. And a way that we can start to move there is as we're asking these questions, if we can't get out of judgment or we need to give ourselves some of that grace, I want you to take a moment and take a step back and ask yourself, how would you talk to a friend or peer who either made a mistake or who's in your situation? And that's the core of self-compassion and self-kindness, and also known as self-kindness. That's the core of this is how would you treat or talk to someone else in the situation that you're in? And maybe you need another way that this has been shared is we give ourselves some self-empathy. That's another word you can use, is when we step into the self-empathy. And I know positive intelligence shares an activity of looking at it and saying, how, picturing yourself as a child. And what would you say to that child? Because I'm guessing you wouldn't be right. You wouldn't tell them they weren't capable. You wouldn't tell them they weren't good enough. What would you tell them? And the same thing, maybe a friend or peer feels more comfortable. When you step out of the situation, if a friend or peer came to you with the situation or a loved one and said, hey, here's what happened, what kind of guidance would you give them? What kind of helpful feedback? What kind of encouragement? And try to play with that for yourself and see what would you say to them. And that is the epitome, that is the core of self-compassion and self-kindness, is treating ourselves the way we treat others, with kindness and love and empathy, and turning that towards ourselves. So we want to, just as a quick recap, and let me share one thing real quick. I was working with someone and we had a really big surprise. We were talking about if a leadership, leadership, and if that was a career move. And then as we were talking about it, we started looking at some values and what values are important there. And then we started looking at what started coming up was the challenge that if these values, if the person didn't feel they were living their values, then how hard they could become on themselves and how much they could, how harsh they could be to themselves, which brought up a question for me as a coach as to, what role does self-compassion play in this, in our decision here? And as we started talking about it, I even got a learning out of this, which was we started seeing that when we moved in that direction of looking at leadership and our values and how it made us and how a person could feel when they don't live their values, and how do we, if we work self-compassion in, when we started playing around with that, we saw that self-compassion actually brought in an opportunity in leadership for greater connections with senior leaders, colleagues, team members, and the stress it could take off of a person, and the greater connection that could be made with people. And it was a completely unexpected connection that came out of this, and a really huge learning for both of us. But self-compassion is when we give it to ourselves, we're able to dive in deeper with others. So that's something to think about. So just as a way just to kind of sum up everything we're talking about here, we want to make sure that, one, we wouldn't let anybody else be horribly mean to us. We would want to avoid them or minimize our time with them or get away from them completely. So we want to remember we don't want to treat ourselves that way, because when we do, we lose our ability to be the strong, confident decision makers and action takers that we can be. And how can we do that? Well, we recognize and we call out when our inner critic starts gaining speed and getting a lot of mental talking going on. We take a moment to connect with our senses or our body. And then we ask ourselves what went right. And then we can go into how we ask ourselves some what and how questions. And when we have why questions, we try to change them to what and how. And one big thing that comes up with me for self-compassion and self-kindness is to remember that we aren't making excuses for ourselves. We're facing the situation as it really is and growing. So when I ask myself what went right, I'm not giving myself a passive, oh, look how great this went. No, I'm looking at the reality. There are things that went right. And when I look at the reality of what can I do differently? That's looking at the reality of the situation, not making excuses. And I'm learning. But all the whys are just pushing me away towards an unrealistic belief that I can do things perfectly the next time. So I really appreciate all of your time. As I shared, one of my favorite things to do is share these tips with you that you can grab and run into your day with to help you have the ability to really step into making decisions, being more productive, being more motivated. And if our mind's getting in the way of that, I like to provide ways that can help you to quiet those down. And there are ways that I'm applying constantly because I struggle with many of the same things that you do, and as do my clients that I love supporting, and we get to see that development. So if this resonates with you, I would love for you to jump onto my website, sign up. I send out, I do blogs that are about 5 minutes to give you some tips. I do these webinars, and I send out some things that can help you to just grow and help yourself a little more every day. So thank you again so much. I'm Lindsay Pfister-Kerr with LPK Coaching, and I really appreciate your time and hope you have a great rest of your day.